From what I've read and heard, typically people would recommend above 1,000 micromoles per meter square per second, that it is beneficial to increase CO2 in parts per million to the same number. So if it was 1,000 micromoles up to about 1,000 ppm, if it's 1,400 micromoles up to about 1,400 ppm. Have you found that to be true?
No. CO2 is a low-cost input, and the leaves saturate at about 1,200 parts per million.
Okay.
So before you start paying a big electric bill, you should always get your CO2 to 1,200 parts per million. And even if you have lower light intensity, it still proportionately increases photosynthesis. If CO2 was an expensive input, then maybe we could go by this rule of thumb that you just mentioned. But it's a cheap input compared to the electricity to run the lights. So I would always put it at the optimum level and then increase the light.
And if, for argument's sake, somebody was running a system at 800 micromoles, for argument's sake, but at standard, atmospheric CO2 levels, so about 400 parts per million. If they did increase those parts per million CO2 up to 1,200, the maximum the plant can absorb, how big an increase would that be on the rate of growth, do you think, in rough terms?
We usually say that there's a 30% increase in photosynthesis. That's kind of the standard, going from 400 to 1,200. That's pretty significant.
Irrespective of the power intensity?
Yes.
Wow.
Irrespective of the power intensity. I mean, it's sort of a incorrect, I guess I won't call it a myth, but the idea is if you don't have high light, you don't need high CO2. But 30% of 1 is still an increase. Yeah. 30% of 10 is an even bigger increase, but it's always 30%.
Okay.
Even at low light. And then the question is, does that translate into increased yield? And at least in the case of cannabis, our studies indicate yes, it does. So it's not just a 30, and it can be a 50% increase in photosynthesis, resulting in a 30% increase in yield.